Hey, and welcome to another Sunday Superversive live stream. I'm your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and today we are going to be talking about projects we're doing outside of Pinkerton's Ghosts. Specifically, I'm going to talk about a sci-fi and an Arthurian legend, and Anthony's going to talk about his Greek myth, as well as anything else he might be working on. But how are you doing today,
Yep,
Anthony?
yep. I'm having a lovely day. How about you?
Oh, I'm doing well. Not much is really happening here except working on projects, which is a good thing to have. Uh, the big thing I'm working on is a new sort of like allegorical. Uh, how do I want to put it? It's an allegory for the Christian life, but using a knight going through the usual adventures and so on and so forth, and I think that'll be quite interesting. It means every night we'll have something new to say about different things and events that either they participated in or, something else happened. We'll find out. Hmm.
Okay, so for your yeah, let's dig into this so that we can
Yeah.
talk a little what we're doing. So for your knights thing, your
Mm-hmm.
Arthurian knights. So this is planned to be like a cycle of stories that
Yep.
take place in sci-fi universe.
No, not in a sci-fi universe. In the Arthurian canon itself.
Okay.
Rather than
Okay, understood.
rewrite it or anything
That's what I
like that,
thought.
I would be very explicitly taking in the ideas uh, that were present in there and treating it like the Mallory and others treated it, which is to say, an actual story they are writing about the myths of England, except with characters we all know and recognize. I'd be taking in their serious depictions very carefully and then reusing them as needed for this stuff. It's like one of those things. It's like, yes, they're going to be all the same characters. Lancelot's going to be Lancelot. Mordred's going to be Mordred. But I'm going to be doing interesting things with them. So it's not just Lancelot being Lancelot, but rather we're going to sort of discuss why what philosophies and ideas would he necessarily have to believe in to make the choices he did make. And I'm not like talking like I'm going to justify them or anything like that because I'm not a fan of Lancelot. I've never been a fan of Lancelot. I've been a fan of Galahad and Sir Bedivere and others, but it's did I say that right? Sir Bors is always
I've
pretty
heard
cool.
Bedivere,
Bedivere.
but you're fine.
It's Bedivere. But basically, it's like I'm very tired of these. Hey, Carl. Sort of ideas where it's like they take with the characters and it's like, what if they're teenagers? What if they're this? What if they're like women?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay,
Uh,
Thursday night.
So
Okay.
as you know, I'm a huge fan of the Arthuriana and Arthurian stories. I was before going in, but weirdly enough, I haven't read a lot of the primary sources, but I adored T.H. White's The Once and Future King, especially The Ill-Made Knight and The Candle in the Wind. I thought were amazing.
The Ill-Made
Bradford is
Knight
here.
is absolutely amazing. Hey, Bradford.
I consider The Ill-Made Knight to be the second best fantasy novel ever written into The Lord of the Rings, but and I don't think that that's that controversial of an opinion either. For
No.
that matter, I think it's widely good to be, if not the best, at least a masterpiece.
Oh, it's a
So the
masterpiece.
Ill-Made Knight's fantastic.
I wouldn't like. I don't know.
Uh,
Like, what does Narnia rank
it's
for
a
you?
fantastic.
I'm scared
Where
now.
does Narnia rank? I don't know. Like, I'm more of a fan generally of tiering. I mean, I'll rank these because they're so high up in the canon that I think it's fairly uncontroversial where I stick it. But Narnia would be in the S tier. So
Okay, good.
yeah,
We're gonna have to do a tier video sometime.
it's Yeah, I don't know if I've read enough fantasy to really give a great accounting of it. I just know I thought that the Ill-Made Knight was unbelievable. And weirdly, I didn't think that... I was a little bit bored by The Sword in the Stone.
Yeah,
I
me
was
too.
kind of... if anything, I was mildly disappointed by it. I don't know what I was expecting, though, but... I thought the Queen of Air and Darkness was a little bit better. And by the way, I'm going to pause for a moment here
Hey,
to say
Cordell.
that THY... What was that?
You go for it. Keep going.
Yeah, I'm going to pause for a second here to say that T.H. White was absolutely... he was probably the best I've ever seen at titles. All of his titles are S tier. Just
Yes.
fantastic. Anyway, the Queen of Air and Darkness, I thought was a little bit better, but still, not that great. The Ill-Made Knight, I thought, was incredible. Like, I was blown away. It was such a huge jump in quality and everything about it. And The Candle in the Wind was almost as good as The Ill-Made Knight. So, that's... I read that. I read Stephen Lawhead's Pendragon Cycle, which is amazing as well. He has a series... I'm trying to think of the names of the books. Taliesin, Merlin, Arthur, Pendragon, and Grail. And the way that the series worked is... He actually communicated... I wrote a review of one of his books, and he actually, responded to it on, my blog years and years ago. Stephen Lawhead, which is cool that he was around and looking for that sort of thing. Authors are normal people. Even big famous authors Google to see who's writing reviews of their books. It's kind of cool. But anyway, Stephen Lawhead responded to my review and said, because I said my big criticism of it, I said it's not really a criticism, it's just me griping, but I didn't like the Welsh names because I cannot pronounce them and I refuse to use them in my review. And he's like, I was just trying to be true to the Welsh sources, and I'm like, I know. It's not really a big deal, but he would use, really complicated Welsh spellings of the names. But it's a great series. I always tell people, and I'm going to tell you now, if you're looking into Arthuriana, in case you pick up the series, which I highly recommend you do, because I think you would enjoy it. It's very, very explicitly Christian. There is an absolutely unbelievable scene in Book 3, Arthur, where Arthur has been winning battle after battle to take Britain back from the barbarians that have taken it over. And he is, reclaiming Britain as the true king and uniting them under his banner. And a traitor has arrived. This is not Mordred. We're well before Mordred, a completely different traitor. But traitor has allied himself with the enemy and has basically barricaded himself inside what was Arthur's capital city. And, he let the enemy in while Arthur was gone, and he's barricaded himself in there, and they're stuck. I might be getting context wrong, but that's the gist of it. And Arthur tries to fight him during the day, but it doesn't go well because they're barricaded in, and he realizes he has two options now. He could try and continue the fight, but it probably won't go well if he does. Or he can retreat. The problem is, if Arthur retreats and he allows them to dig into that position, all of the gains he's made over the past few months will probably go up in smoke, within days. So he's really, really trapped. So he's on the banks of the ocean, and Merlin walks out and announces to everyone that in order for them to win the battle, they must build a wall of prayer. And Arthur walks in front of his entire army and announces to them that all of them, to win this battle, all of them must be baptized that very day in the waters of the ocean. And he baptizes his entire army. And then when his army wakes up the next day, they notice that Arthur isn't there. And when they look for him, he is dragging rocks out to surround his encampment and build a wall, blocking their own escape. But he said, Merlin says the only way for us to win is to build a wall of prayer. So that's what I'm doing. So the rest of the army sees what he's doing and joins him in building this wall. And the people from the city don't want to leave the city and attack Arthur because the city is their one position, but they're afraid of what Arthur is doing. Because what sort of person, the only person who would ever block off their retreat has to know, right, that they will win.
Mm-hmm.
You never block off your own retreat. So finally, possibly because they're afraid and they freak out, and possibly because of divine intervention, at night they leave their city and charge down the hill and attack Arthur's army. And nighttime is the only time that Arthur could even potentially have a chance to win, because the night nullifies some of the advantage of the army. And after a long fight, Arthur wins the battle and he wins the day. And it's a beautiful, beautiful scene. It's wonderfully Christian that he baptizes them all. It connects it explicitly to prayer. It's just awesome. Pendragon Cycle is great. However, if you read it in this order: Taliesin, Merlin, Book 1 of Arthur, and Book 2 of Arthur. Then skip ahead to the book Pendragon and Grail. Then read Book 3 of Arthur. The reason for this is that Lawhead said himself that the publisher dropped his series before he could get out every book that he wanted, so he had to wrap it up quickly. Pendragon and Grail take place in between Book 2 and Book 3 of Arthur, and they read much better if you don't know the final ending of the story. He also wrote a 6th book called Avalon that's, I don't think as great. It's okay. It takes place in the modern day. I was a little bit disappointed in it. But yeah, that's my recommendation for you if you're into Arthuriana. I tried to describe that one scene because I'm trying to sell you on it, and that's like the most explicitly Christian scene in the story. So I'm hoping that appeals to you some. I love Stephen Lawhead. He's one of those people who really should be more popular among, I think, the Superversives, which I've said for a long time. Like, I don't know why he's not. He also has a Robin Hood series that's equally wonderful.
Yeah, I haven't read Stephen Lawhead.
I know, not enough people have. It's sad to me.
Yeah, I dig it. My thing is less about like the overarching adventure, partially because guys like Stephen Lawhead and T.H. White exist, and I don't really feel like retelling something that I wouldn't call them better than me. No, they're very good. They're better than me in many regards, especially since I believe that they got paid for their stories.
Well, White is an interesting case. White is a master, but I disagree so fundamentally with some of his positions on things.
Yes.
Kind of interesting.
I think we might have talked about this on a stream a long time ago. Or at least I certainly talked about it.
Possible.
I didn't like it either, partially because I don't think he understood sin. And
no, he didn't.
Yes. So he wasn't able to blame Lancelot as he should have for his evil deeds.
I'm of the opinion that T.H. White fundamentally misunderstood the Arthurian saga. He claims, end of the Queen of Air and Darkness, he goes off on a limb, as older authors are sometimes wont to do. They go off the narrative and address the reader. Mm-hmm. People will sometimes mark a flaw, but this was a common thing in like older styles of writing, right?
Yes.
And White did this fairly often in the Once and Future King trilogy. He, as the author, would address the reader. And at the end of the Queen of Air and Darkness, Arthur sleeps with his half-sister Morgause, as is in, Mallory and some of those legends, right? Mm-hmm. So, T.H. White says in this part of the story that this is the fundamental moment. He goes, you need to understand, this is why there was a tragedy. And he goes, and it wasn't really Arthur's fault. Arthur was enchanted and hoodwinked, and he was tricked into it. He didn't know it was his half-sister, and she was literally a sorceress. He goes, but this is what caused the tragedy to follow. And he goes, and and he describes it as something like a Greek tragedy, like Orpheus, Orpheus, Oedipus Rex.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a Greek tragedy, and it was inevitable, and it was nobody's fault. I completely disagree with him. So I think even in his own story, as he wrote it, that's not true. That the actual moment that caused the tragedy to be inevitable was when Arthur decides to kill all of the infants.
Yes.
Which leads to the origin story of Mordred. This was an explicit, deliberate, and evil choice by Arthur.
Yep.
Arthur knows that this was wrong. He admits it later, but Guinevere and Lancelot kind of just go, it's okay. And, to Arthur, the character's credit, he seems to not, he seems to understand himself, like, that it was a wicked thing that he did.
Yeah.
And even when Guinevere and Lancelot him, it's okay. Arthur's like, yeah, no. It's like, thanks, but no. And I would agree with Arthur, and I would disagree with Lancelot and Guinevere's reaction. You have to have, like, don't get me wrong, that many years after the fact, Arthur is the king. He's not going to jail. He's not going to be executed. But to hear a revelation like that and not react, it goes down to White's misunderstanding of sin. That, this was all preordained, so you can't really blame Arthur anyway, right?
Right, but of course, we don't agree with that. We can say, blah, 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 Arthur isn't at fault because fate, something, something. But the thing is that I think that's like you said, a misunderstanding of the canon, which I hadn't picked up on until now, because it's fundamentally a pagan way of doing things. One of the things I'm considering for this ending is for the character to be, martyred by essentially Conan the Barbarian in literal Hyperborea after he preaches the gospel free from the fear of death. Focus on that, because as anyone who understands paganism would know, death is the preoccupation of paganism. In the sense that all you do is to live a life that will survive your death. If you're of a heroic character. If you're not of a heroic character, just do what you want, man. Who cares? Who cares about you? But not everyone really gets the subtleties of that on the best of days anyway. So it's this death that he accepts so well that causes the barbarian king to leave and seek the Holy Grail for himself. Because I'm using Holy Grail as an explicit metaphor for salvation, as you do.
Right, which I think is how it's generally understood for at least a lot of the writers.
Sure, but no one ever comments on it. It's either so understood nobody talks about it explicitly anymore, or I just haven't come across it in the sense of salvation. Let's see what the chat's
I get
saying.
your point.
Hey, Escape Velo, long time no see. Cordal and everything. Carl says, have you heard that Mallory was the one to make Lancelot into an adulterer? That Mallory himself has his own serious moral flaws? I don't know. I've discovered that I really never want to hear about authors' personal lives, just because they usually tend to...
I believe Mallory wrote La Mort d'Arthur while in prison.
Ah. What did he get up to? I'm actually curious now, because it's not just like something sordid.
Yeah, it was a long time since I've looked up Mallory, but
Mallory,
look him up. The La Mort... I've been reading Dalrock for a long time. Our Lord and Savior Dalrock, who sadly stopped writing on his wonderful blog years ago, and he wrote a lot about, like, courtly love and chivalry. And he did not like La Mort d'Arthur and what he was supporting La Mort d'Arthur.
I think it looks like he might have been on the wrong side of the War of the Roses.
That's what it looks like to me, although some of the stuff that he did was kind of, yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
Anyway, going into, like, the whole Lancelot adultery thing, I will say this. I think that as a dramatic device, it's incredibly effective.
Yes.
Like, I think there is a lot of drama in Lancelot having an affair with Guinevere and whatever. I do think there's somewhat unfortunate in that it has to make Arthur a cuck. And I don't think that Mallory's Arthur, or not Mallory, White's Arthur was able to entirely overcome this. He comes across a rather weak-willed figure.
Yes.
Which I don't think was White's goal. I don't think White wanted him to come across that way. Keep in mind, by the way, that as I say these criticisms of White's work, these criticisms are to be taken in stride with my earlier praise of White's work. Right. So it's all relative.
It's written so well, we don't mind the flaws as much as you might think.
Yes, exactly.
And also, it's a good example of how those flaws play out in literature. Like, reading a terrible fan fiction does not actually teach you anything about literature and writing. A great fan fiction could, but and I use fan fiction for a reason, just because it's Arthurian legend. Everything is basically fan fiction at this point. Um, like I read something while I was looking up the names of Mordred's sons, and supposedly he has two. Only one is actually named Melahan, and there's another one called Melo, who Melou, who it was named much later and recently. So that's how it goes. And I discovered a fan fiction, and I'm like, okay, what's this? What's this fresh hell? And it had 25,000 views, and it was absolutely garbage, terrible. Hated it. Didn't read it all. I basically skimmed like a page. And it was choppy sentences. There was no flair. There was no sign of skill. This was just a very bad fan fiction that somebody with no writing talent had written. There was nothing to it. There's no soul or anything like that. Uh, so it's like there are, but with T.H. White's thing, part of the reason why it's so interesting is because it's not just some sort of, how do I want to put it, just some sort of flash in the pan, I dash this off in 15 seconds sort of thing. It is a
Yeah,
fully
like
developed
White
idea.
is not somebody who does not know how to write.
Exactly.
He is somebody who is a master at writing, in fact.
Mm-hmm. He is,
But
he is very strong.
yeah, like I do think though that there is in his Once and Future King cycle, I do think that there is a serious problem in it, in that Arthur, I don't think he meant to come across as, and I'm going to use the Vox Day terminology here, as gamma as he does. Now, Lancelot, I do think was meant to be gamma, and in fact, it's one of the great feats of characterization ever.
Yeah.
The Ill-Made Knight is an absolutely perfect and entirely intentional portrait of a gamma. Right? It's probably the best ever depicted on the page. It is
I
dead on in its
can't.
psychological accuracy.
I didn't read it when I was aware of the terms gamma and whatnot, so I'll have to read it again to say for sure. But I won't argue with you on it at all. I think that's probably accurate.
Now, Arthur also comes across that way in, or at least he comes across as kind of weak-willed, and I don't think he's supposed to. Like Mallory mentioned, or I keep calling him Mallory. I mean White. White. It's important to, because they do have differences. White's version of Arthur, he mentions in The Queen of Air and Darkness, invents total war, and is in fact a genius at battle, right? Like canonically. White does not describe the battles. He just says, like, that Arthur, the reason that Arthur was able to win these wars is that he was utterly ruthless because he hated war. And he wanted them to end quickly, and he needed people to surrender. Which, okay, fine, that's an interesting way of going about it and whatever, but, and he actually says that, like, Arthur, his version of Arthur invented total war. So, but when you reach, like, the candle in the wind, it's very hard to, and the Ill-Made Knight, while Arthur is likable, and while he is in some ways sympathetic, it's very hard to respect him.
Yes.
He does not necessarily come across as the sort of person who could be in charge of Camelot. The right. Camelot. Now, that said, I do think that, and that's an unfortunate consequence of making him a cuck, but with that said, I do think there is a lot of very good drama to be born out of the fact that Lancelot was Arthur's greatest knight, and he was having an affair with his wife, who Arthur could not give a child, or who could not give Arthur a child. So he had no heir. And so she was cucking him with his greatest knight. Like, that alone adds a lot of drama. The musical Camelot that was theoretically based on T.H. White, they took out one of the fundamental aspects of T.H. White's Lancelot, which is that T.H. White's Lancelot was hideously ugly. In the Camelot musical, they just completely took that away. Like, they ignored it. Which is a shame, because it fundamentally changes the character. But it's interesting. Like, I like that aspect of the story. So I'm going to tell you something that I was doing when I came out with Tales of the Once and Future King years ago, it took place in a futuristic universe that was post-apocalyptic Britain, and that was about the return of Arthur. And it was I came up with the idea because I read Lawhead's Avalon, and I mentioned to you before I was kind of disappointed in it. It was about Arthur's return, and I decided I wanted to do it right, so I made it like post-apocalyptic. If Arthur's gonna come back, it's gotta be really when Britain's in about as bad shape as you can imagine it being. You know, People like John C. Wright have generally interpreted this to mean like the end times, and I think that's also a valid way of looking at it. But this was my version. So, yeah, Escape Velo mentions the Mists of Avalon, feminist doggerel. Anyway,
Oh, yeah.
we, we don't talk
Incestuous.
about Bradley here.
Yeah, we don't.
But anyway, so going into my future thing, one thing that I wanted to do was have, the whole question of prophecy and what prophecies can be stopped and what prophecies can't be was at the forefront of my mind. Now, we know biblically that prophecies are not actually absolute. For example, Jonah prophesizes the doom of the Ninevites, but because the Ninevites repent, God has mercy on them.
Mm-hmm.
So, prophecies of doom, biblically speaking, which is the accurate way of looking at it, I'm sure you would agree,
Mm-hmm.
are not apt, right? Which is where this gets interesting to me. And we have an exact and explicit reference to this in the prophecy of Jonah. Carl Philip Gabler says it's so much worse than feminist drivel, laughing my ass off. Point of order, I said feminist doggerel. That's Doggerel. Completely different. Anyway.
Worse.
Yeah. But anyway. So, in my version of the story, I had one of the characters who was going to be like, the future version of Merlin. He was going to become a priest. And he sees, visions of the future, and he sees that, the person who is going to be like the new Arthur's number 2, Mike, was going to have an affair with his wife, and this was going to lead to the fall of Camelot. So it became like a thing that I was writing where this was all in the long-term plan. I have not written yet, but I might one day, because I did publish something in this universe. So it's not like it's totally not out there, but and it was going to be a major conflict if he was going to tell them about this. Because he goes, like, if I warn them about it, will that just make the prophecy happen? Or if I warn them about it, will it prevent the prophecy? And then what would happen? And there was the prophecy, too, that, Arthur was going to die, and who was the new Arthur, and he was going to die. So I had the intention of naming the last book in the series The Death of Arthur, and I was going to pull a Watership down, and I was going to end it with, his death of old age. So now you'll know. Anybody who sees this book, 5 years from now or something, and is wondering about it, and they'll know the ending if they've listened to this one specific live stream.
We'll see if it gets past editing. That's what's gonna happen.
But yeah, the idea though of the downfall of Camelot, I guess what I find compelling is it's caused by the greatness, but also the personal sins of the people involved. These same people who were so great that they were the only people that could create Camelot, were also the people whose sins were so great that it necessitated the fall of Camelot. Their flaws were as great as their greatness.
Yeah. Which is something that people don't really get. Part of what I'm going to do with my character is have him go through knightly flaws. One of the flaws that classic Gaheris had was that he gets the treatment that Agravain usually gets right now. That is to say, he's angry, he's aggressive, he's a little bit judgmental, and so on and so forth. And it causes him to make rash decisions. Well, that used to be Harris's thing. Now they kind of lowered his intelligence a bit for some reason, even though it was perfectly reasonable. He would get on a track and then he would be stuck on that track, and then people would die or something. But he kills his mother in the original stories, not Agravain. Agravain usually gets the negative traits, but Agravain uh, in in contrast had a lot of high regard. He wasn't like as good as Gawain or anything like that, but everyone respected him, and he's called hard-handed of all things. Um, and with this, I would have Gaheris talk about, well, since they're supposedly Christian men, with Christian understandings of the world and so on, Gaheris would talk about, well, there's justice, right? He didn't kill his mother because she was rude to him or something like that. He killed her because she was sleeping with Lamorak, who killed their father, her husband. And it was completely over lust. Like, she wasn't planning on seducing him, then murdering him. But instead, that role is given to Agravain. So for Gaheris, it's like justice this, justice that, and I would make something that would believably lead to him murdering his own mother, and beheading her in her bed, is what happens. And then with Agravain, I would actually take a different route. He is as noble as his legends say, but his question and responses isn't about justice or anger and justice and so on, with the answer, oh, well, it's all right until innocent people get hurt, which would be a, very vicious way to do it. His response would be about his reputation. Well, what about these insults? Listen, kid, everyone's gonna insult you. If you're good at anything, people are gonna hate on you. Now, you can live a virtuous life, and be above the haters, or you can live as the haters want you to hate, want you to be. And that's, and I'm going to play it like that so that he has a explanation as to why he gets more villainous roles, and there's an explanation why Gaheris made the evil choice he did. Uh, because him murdering Morgause, his own mother, was evil, even if she was sleeping with the quote unquote enemy. I
Yeah, the.
mm.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So that's what I'm going to be doing with this stuff. Instead of, like, how do I want to put it? Like, this strange moralizing about what goes on with these guys that most everyone does in general. It'll be entirely about what would lead them to make the rational choices that they're doing. In which case, it would be that. Like, and it's going to be weird because for some of them, like Morgause, there is not even a shred of explanation why she did some of the things she did. Like, other than, yeah, evil, you know, I'm a witch, I like it, but like, it's never, like, that's not how their internal dialogue goes. Maybe Mordred could go, like, yeah, dude, ambition for ambition's sake. It's not about the climb, it's about how high you climb. Yeah, I could believe that he had a philosophy like that. Um, a lot of people have a philosophy like that. People don't think about themselves, but he would be smart enough to think about it. Like, I talk to people and they are completely, uh, how do I want to put it? They don't understand why they do the things they do, and part of it is the fact that they're quote unquote not sentient, but also it's that Christ hasn't worked on their life. Somebody who doesn't understand um, how to interact with the world and make the choices doesn't have the ability to explain why beyond their personal personal flaws and peccadillos. And everyone has a ton of those flaws too. And it's like, yeah, you know, you go to a bar, just watch people get drunk and get thrown out of a bar. So that's what my goal is with this story. It's to take these ideas and explanations and talk about them in a way that a knight would understand and a boy would understand. Not just like, a boy like as in a literal boy, but like a boy is in an adventure story sort of deal. Someone who could, understand what's going on here and understand how it would apply to his masculine walk. I'm going to call the character Melan, because for some reason Mordred named all his kids Mel something. Uh, and he'll be on these adventures while he has these conversations, and that's kind of, I don't know. It'll be important to how things go for these guys.
Yeah, see, the thing that makes, in my opinion, the story work, like the, whole story of Lancelot's adultery, Guinevere, and Mordred's betrayal and all that, it works because their flaws do arise from their characters. Like,
Yep.
Lancelot being the greatest knight, that sort of thing, like, of course, that's the one who would seduce the queen, right?
Right.
The greatest one, the one who would seduce the queen.
Right.
And the queen would be frustrated for not being able to bear a son, an heir to the throne. So,
Right.
of course, she would commit adultery. But these things, though, are also connected with the reason that Camelot worked. Like, even White mentions it, that the very fact that Arthur is willing to, in a sense, not explicitly, but all but explicitly overlook his wife's adultery is because he's trying to create a fair society where trial is by rule of law, right?
Yep.
So he's not going to, go Othello on Desdemona there and, strangle her in her bed.
Right.
But so all of these things are like intimately connected with the same things that make Camelot great. Now, with that said, there is something to the idea of, in a Christian society, it should be able to work. If that makes sense. Like, not that it should work finally, but, these flaws shouldn't be able to destroy it. You should be able to adapt for at least a period of time.
Yeah.
Now, all human societies fail, but Camelot is so dependent on Arthur that it fails immediately upon his death. So there is something that's, like, kind of inherently, there is a flaw at the heart of Camelot.
Come, my child.
It's not set up for long-term success.
Right.
And I do wonder if there's something about it that's worth addressing in that respect. But yeah, in
that
my
they
version,
didn't have an answer for adultery in their Christian society.
They didn't have an answer for adultery. They didn't have an answer to accommodate sin, I guess.
Yes, I get
They didn't know to accommodate sin in their society. And in White's version, they explicitly do, because White denies original sin.
Yes.
In fact, he says it again, because it's a book, from an older era where they're willing to do this. He says it very, very explicitly.
Right.
And he describes it as like a noble thing that they deny original sin.
Right, which we would both agree
Purity
that
and innocence will fill her mind.
That's not noble, that's foolish.
From the
Right.
memories of her painful
and
life.
it's like, I don't. So we're gonna save this for another live stream, but I just want to bring this up from a Protestant perspective. The Immaculate Conception of Mary is a logic bomb. Christ being God does not need original sin. Does not have original sin as part of his being, but all humans do. When Mary is born without original sin, or the capacity to sin, or whatever nice words are said, it causes the question to arise, why just Mary when Jesus was sufficient? And there's people say things, people have explanations, Mary full of grace and so on and so forth. And I don't want to get into the weeds with this. I'm just sort of bringing it up. But without original sin, the idea of Jesus' sacrifice gets screwed up. Because if God could remove original sin and not invalidate free will, there is a problem with him saying, with the events of the Bible as they were portrayed, because then he could maintain free will and remove the choice. But he didn't. And instead, he was perfectly willing to say, even though I have the power to do an impossible thing, which would be like creating a rock which I cannot move, because of his holiness, not because of his actual power. His holiness trumps like things like an atheist talking about a giant rock. Uh, the idea that because T.H. White could not accept original sin, his Arthurian characters become unable to fix their sin issues and instead become puppets of fate, which is part of probably his intended metaphor, but in a more like sort of real world extent, it meant that they could never take any decision to solve their problems through Jesus Christ, even though supposedly they were some sort of Christian. His books are a little bit muddy because he himself doesn't really understand it.
See, you dropped a bomb on me here, and then said you don't want to discuss.
I don't want to discuss it because we have an entire live stream dedicated to it.
You brought it up.
We will have an entire live stream dedicated to it just for you. Just for you. But what I'm saying is that
I agree with the general idea that there's a major flaw in T.H. White positing a society without.
And I'm using a Mary's Immaculate Conception as a vehicle for a comparison between the logic bomb that T.H. White presents and a Protestant perspective on an ex cathedra statement that is dogma in the Catholic Church.
See, you've requested.
It is entirely about the Protestant perspective of a Catholic theology.
Okay, so yeah, here's the thing about what T.H. White did specifically. T.H. White is trying to posit, and he sees this as a noble thing. Carl Philip Gabler says Prot versus Catholic blood sports after he asked the question why you can't have been conceived in a sinful woman. So, again, another time. Right? But
don't worry, we will someday. But
yeah, Prot versus Catholic blood
it is
sports,
actually though.
Yeah, Prot versus Catholic blood sports, yes. Anyway, yeah, here's the thing about T.H. White and his portrayal of the society and whatever. I think that there is a fundamental flaw. He sees, like, Arthur is trying to posit a society where original sin doesn't exist. And he sees a noble but doomed attempt of Arthur. That's the way he portrays it. It was never going to work, but it was noble that he tried.
Yeah.
I would argue, contra T.H. White, that it was not even noble to try, that in fact it was not noble, it was never going to work, it was foolish, and it completely I don't know, I'm trying to figure out exactly how to state this. There was something wrong with Arthur's reality. He was seeing a world that wasn't real. If you pretend that original sin doesn't exist for the sake of your fantasy kingdom, which is literally what's going on here, you're not going to create an idealized world. You are just going to create a world that does not accommodate for sin and collapses at the first sign of it. And that is exactly what we see in the story.
And of course, it was already collapsing with Mordred and others, and their actions.
It was collapsing with Mordred and others, but he denies original sin exists, which is even more insane when you realize that Arthur himself was one of the worst sinners in the story. Now, again, Arthur can recognize this in the story, but he's trying to go, well, no, I'm imagining that in a world where people don't sin. But why? Why would you do that? Yeah, like.
Why would you make such a weird choice?
You're imagining a world where, people don't have a tendency to sin. That world doesn't exist, though. So
Right.
you've just set your whole kingdom on a foundation of glass. It's not noble to pretend.
Yep.
It's just not going to work.
Yep.
You need forgiveness. You need redemption. You need a method to account for that. You need a way, and you need justice. All of these things that need to be accounted for. And all of these things, you need to have original sin on your mind as something
Yep.
that, a part of the society. You can't just ignore it. Now,
Yep.
this does mean that I guess what White would argue is it's supposed to be Camelot, the perfect society. And what he's saying is it would never work. But I would argue that if I'm imagining the best possible society that can be made on, I would imagine heaven, which I guess doesn't have original sin in one sense.
Yep.
But I think that the heavenly society is ruled not by Arthur, who tried to murder infants, but by the perfect king. So, there's something, humans aren't going to be in charge of it, at least if they are, in some sort of sense, only by proxy, and only people who have been conformed to God's will.
And
Arthur didn't have a conforming people to God's will, so...
Yep. I would say that the argument that, oh, well, it's supposed to be about, what was it, like the perfect society. Well, the problem is that everyone involved in that thing was imperfect in some way, and that was the point of the original stories. This wasn't some sort of, like, well, sure, there was some fan fiction and stuff like that, and there was some, like, real history behind it. But at a certain point, it was about these men who were men of their times, who were knights, who attempted a chivalric ideal, and they needed rules to make sure that they didn't just randomly start killing each other over anything, because that's eventually what happens. The King Lot brothers, Gawain, Gareth, Agravain, and Mordred, depending on who you think Mordred's father was, killed the Orkney brothers. There we go. Killed Lamorak. They killed Lord Pelennor for killing King Lot. They did this. They did that. And that's like people who are undoubtedly heroic, like Gawain. Lancelot kills people all the time. Like, they make a joke out of it in the Monty Python movie, but he kills people, quite a bit. He is unfaithful. He has these
character. I would say I should say fully noble. Not truly, because there are a lot of noble characters, but the only full noble character is Galahad.
Yep.
And Galahad kind of, yeets his way into heaven
He's basically sinless. I view him as an explicit, like, manifestation of Jesus. Like, it's like, and I don't mean like in the story I'm writing, he's going to be literally walking on water and dueling my character while he's walking on water. Just because, like, I can't make this metaphor more complete. Because it's important to his character and to the characters of others. Not only, by the way, the purpose of the conversation they'll have is to say that basically, to be perfect, quote unquote, you have to always do it and never stop being perfect. And of course, the point is that, okay, dude, if you think you can do it, come fight me on the water, standing on it like I am now. And of course, Melon won't be able to. Which is the point of it. He cannot meet the standard that Galahad can. Who, again, might be Jesus in disguise or something. Who knows? I'm not telling. Something literary metaphor, something. But, people, I think, don't really get that looking back at these guys. Galahad was the slap in the face to all of them. He hit every note that everyone was talking about and everyone was trying to do. He did everything Lancelot couldn't. He did everything others couldn't. Several of them had quests that were, like, not fulfilled, and he fulfilled them. And that was the point of him. So, I find the statement that, like, oh yeah, well, Camelot would fall, like, duh, but also very much like you're making it sound artsier than it really is. In reality, everyone, even the, knights participating in and building it, knew that there was a pretty strong chance this would fail, but they believed in Arthur enough that they were willing to try. And I say Arthur, not like Jesus Christ or anything like that, because it was the strength of Arthur's personality. I would actually have that, as a thing. One of the things that, Green Knight kind of did interestingly is that Arthur was in his old age at the time of Gawain and the Green Knight, the movie. Even though, Gawain is not really Gawain in this thing. And, he's kind of like, you can kind of see it. Not only is he the one to take action and be courageous, he's also sort of fatherly and grandfatherly to the people around him. And he treats them very well. Like, you can see him, like, joking with his knights after a long day battles. And it's pretty explicit that he's winning wars even as he's sick and dying. So it's like there's no, how do I want to put it? There's no question as to why men of war, not civilized men like we think of them, they weren't soy boys or anything like that. And they weren't like even office managers who work out pretty well on the weekends or whatever have you. You know what I mean? They weren't just Chad. They were like Tads, mega Chads. Each one of them, even the kind of Gamma ones, like their Gamma would still be an alpha to us. And it's like, yeah, absolutely, yeah, sure, it's gonna fall, it's gonna have issues, but also they understood the kind of men that they were, and that their best hope would be that Arthur would have a son who could take over afterwards and prevent a civil war, because Arthur already did the hard work of making a monarchy. Now you just need to maintain it. Well, all his children died in canons that he had children, and like Amram and others. And then any question of legitimacy for any other children is ruined by the affair with Guinevere. It has serious issues to it. And it's more than just that. Like, the kingdom fell apart because Lancelot slept with Guinevere, sure. And because Guinevere was willing to sleep with Lancelot. Because it takes two to tango, and it wasn't a struggle snuggle. It's complicated, sure, to us modern men. Even ones who serve the Lord and consider things deeply and read these stories like us. But even in like the most realistic depictions of them, the idea that they would not understand that Camelot was anything but the kingdom du jour, just like the Rome was before them, and the Britons were before them, is nonsense in a very strong, in the strongest language I can think of.
Yeah, the Arthurian legends do have a Christian influence in them, the original ones. T.H. White actually removed the Christianity from the original King Arthur stories. Now, say original, the Mabinogion, I actually can't remember if the Mabinogion was explicitly Christian or not. Now I'm going to Google this to double check.
Not really. There's some of it in there, but it's not the same as we're normally expecting from Camelot. Partially because it was Welsh myth, and Welsh is less Christian than England, at least has in times past.
Yeah, as the King Arthur stories grew in popularity, they had a very Christian flavor to them.
Yep.
And they do in Mallory as well. But Mallory puts more emphasis on the psychology of the characters, which is what T.H. White found compelling. And then T.H. White doesn't remove the Christianity explicitly, but he removes it practically, if that makes sense. Like, don't get me wrong, he goes out of his way to say that Lancelot, he says it, he calls it a two-way love triangle with Lancelot, that he was in love with God and he was in love with Guinevere, and this was always at war in, like, Lancelot's mind.
But he never really lives it. Like, it's, I don't know.
Right, exactly. And Lancelot performs a miracle at the end of the story, and the Holy Grail search is there. But it's all very psychological. Yeah. And Arthur explicitly denies a Christian, dogma, doctrine, whatever you want to call it, in terms of denying original sin. That once you deny it, once you deny it, it makes mincemeat of the entire Christian project and the entire, to get rid of original sin, full stop. And Arthur just kind of casually denies it because of something that Merlin told him.
Yep.
Yeah. And I don't think that, well...
Merlin was a Jesuit.
Yeah. I think that this is because White was riffing off of Mallory very explicitly. White was a huge admirer of Mallory. Mallory did keep the Christianity, but Mallory started focusing on, like, the psychology of the characters, yeah, interesting. It's interesting. I really do love the King Arthur story, so I'm looking forward to seeing what you do with your take on them.
Yep. Like, and I want to be pretty explicit here. I'm not exactly, like, saying, oh, well, I'm going to be doing this and rewriting the story. I am having a character with adventures with while talking to other characters who are on their own adventure. Like, he's going to meet Gawain, and Gawain is going to be in the middle of his quest to find the Green Chapel. And he's going to go, well, what about death? And he's like, well, listen, kid, you're pretty young, so I'll give you the skinny on it. You have to be willing to accept death over besmirching your honor. Doesn't mean, and he's going to basically talk big, but he's talking to himself as much as anything else. Because it's not about Gawain, not visiting the Green Chapel. He does go to the Green Chapel. He does visit the Green Knight. He has all these tests of character and all that jazz. The kicker is that he flinches. So he can't accept it all the way. And I'm talking about the original story. He has the girdle that'll protect him from harm and stuff like that. But he gives it all up, and the Green Knight's like, yeah, you tried, kid. No, not really. He didn't say it like that. But he, kind of just gave it to him. It's like, listen, you showed up and put your head on the block, and you didn't flinch the second and third time I swung at you. So, you're better off than most of these knights anyway. But you're not the best you could be. And when he's talking to my character, his response will be, I have to go and be the best I can be. So it's not just some sort of, like, weird, oh, well, feel good, I won't actually die, I'm immortal sort of thing. It's, yeah, I might die at this. And I'm going to have to be okay with it, no matter what. And I think that's something that's missing out on some of the tales here. Because Gawain, even if he doesn't want to die, has gone, I choose honor over my life.
Yeah,
Don't get jabbed.
Sir Gawain and the Green story is a very weird story. Like, honestly, I've never really been entirely sure of what the message is. There's some weird sexual stuff in Gawain and the Green Knight.
Yeah.
It's
mostly between Bertilac and Bertilac's wife and Gawain. But that's I've always found it funnier than other people have, just because it's like, so what'd you get today? And he's like, don't tell him your wife kissed me twice. Don't tell him your wife kissed me twice. I kissed twice? Oh yeah, lay it on me, brother. Here's a boar. And it's like Bertilac's trolling him. Like, he's clearly trolling him. But it's, I don't know. I never really got the same amount of sexual overtones as everyone else did.
Well, I remember on Balrog's blog, somebody mentioned it, and he goes like, it does raise a question, what would have happened if he slept with her? What would his response have been?
Well, he didn't give the girdle to Bertilac either.
Well, that's true. It's a weird story. I
I like
like
it.
Circling the Green Knight, though.
Yeah.
I do enjoy it.
The movie is better than
Alright,
is
so
said.
I might try it one day, but I have to admit to being skeptical.
They actually got
I am
the like, so they don't treat Gawain like they should. I'll be straight up with that. And there is some weird sexual stuff in it. But they actually treat the questing and the actual like ending properly. Because Gawain goes on adventures. He just doesn't go straight to the Green Chapel. He's like, okay, and here's this land, and here's these adventures. Something, something, ghosts, something, I don't know.
something, something, good something. Okay, so we're an hour in. You've gone over your new
Mm-hmm.
your new ideas. Now, last question before we move on to me, my turn. Mine.
Yes.
Last question is this going to be in a series of short stories or novel?
Short stories. Each short story will
Short
be
story.
a individual event in the questing. And then what'll happen is that I will release them and then publish the novel. I do have to do a bit more planning than I would for like Pinkerton's Ghost for this, because there is an overarching narrative that isn't just, ooh, the Grand Masons are up to something.
Well, and now you know, by the way, this is how we come up with everything in Pinkerton Ghost. So, what's going on? Oh, it's just the and Masons. That'll work, right?
Was that?
This is how we come up with everything in Pinkerton Ghost. So,
Oh yeah.
like, you know, why is this happening? What's going on? Oh, it's just the Grand Masons. Don't worry
It's
about it.
just the Grand
They're,
Masons
they're
again.
being,
Jack will take care of them. Don't worry about it.
yeah, they're being evil again. Don't worry about it. Yeah, so, now moving on to my story, mine.
Yes,
My
you.
turn.
Yes.
No, I'm sorry. Okay, in all seriousness, so we mentioned this a couple of times before. The backstory of this. For years, I have had an idea of doing an adaptation of the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. Now, this is a fool's errand. It is a very bad idea on a practical level, because the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice is probably the single most adapted Greek myth, I think. Literally, the first opera
Next to
ever created was an
Hercules.
adaptation. Hercules is up there, yeah. But literally the first opera ever created was an adaptation of the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. See? Yes, I have read the original version of the story, which way blanking on the name. Something like unbelievably famous.
Hold on. Let's
Might have been Ovid's Metamorphoses.
hold on. Let me go over comments before we really get into that. Let's
Go ahead.
see here. Something
You only got
sorted.
two more.
Yeah. Okay. Miss L. Jaji Lampliers, Rachel series. This is Escape Velo. I got the first 2 books for my niece so far. Oh yeah, just get all of them. They're great. Carl says Christ was born into a sinful world. I don't understand why he can't have been conceived in a sinful. All right.
We talked about this.
Blood sports.
Okay.
I'm ignoring the Escape Phalos comment. I don't even agree with that. I certainly don't believe Joseph was shooting blanks for reasons Anthony will disagree with me over. And then he says Gawain the Green Knight. I'm sorry, I thought these were new comments, not comments we'd already discussed.
Yeah, well, the sorted comment I have issues with on a variety of levels, but whatever.
Yes.
And I
We
think
both
that,
have issues with them in our own way.
and I think that our issues will probably do intersect at various.
Oh, absolutely, they intersect.
Okay. Yeah, I've got to go shut the chickens up in the coops for the night. Hope to be a regular. Thank you for coming. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anyway, so yeah, I'm glad you came. Too bad you got to miss my epic discussion of Greek myth and poetry. So I want to say that the original version, like I said, I have read it. It's actually quite short, the original version of Orpheus and Eurydice. So my
Yeah.
fascination with the story comes from this. A lot of Greek mythology, they act in very strange and almost inexplicable ways. You see this in the Iliad a little bit. Although the Iliad does have a little bit more of an understanding of psychology of the gods, like, Zeus is a mega Chad and Hephaestus is kind of a gamma. And Hera has massive, what's the word, hypergamy. So there is a little bit of an understanding of mythology, but, a lot of, like, the arbitrariness and capriciousness of the gods is almost the theme of the stories, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of the time you read these stories, and a lot of what they're doing is not expounded upon. The way they're thinking isn't expounded upon, so you don't really get an idea of what they're like. Whereas in the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, I think that you don't need all of that background because you completely understand the motivations of the character, right?
Yep.
Orpheus, why is Orpheus? He plays a song so beautiful, can move even the rocks and stones. After the death of his wife, his tune, his melody is so haunting and sad and beautiful that he moves even the stone heart of the god of the dead, and his wife Persephone. And he agrees that he could take Eurydice up behind him, his beloved wife, but only if he does not look behind him. Now that is a note that there is some mystery on. Why? And
Right.
that's been this a lot. There have been a lot of different theories and interpretations of why can't he look behind him, right?
Right.
But I think that actually adds some of the fascination of the story. So, of course, Orpheus does look behind him at the very edge of the underworld, and Eurydice passes back into the underworld forever. And Orpheus cannot re-enter the underworld, for no one can enter the underworld twice. I actually don't think that's consistent in Greek myths. But I like that idea, so I'm going to keep that. And the actual story, people tend to end the story there. The actual end of the story, I've always found to be mildly funny, in that Orpheus sings a song of grief that is so sad and depressing that, like, the tree nymphs or something
The Maenads.
tell him to stop. Yeah, the Maenads get so angry that he won't shut up that they rip him to shreds.
Don't mistake Hades for real myth.
I found it kind of fun. I found it kind of amusing.
Yeah, that's fair.
But whatever. So, that's the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. I've been fascinated by it for years, because I found Orpheus's, it felt like a very cruel story, which of course it is, as most Greek myths are, but a very understandable story. Like,
Right.
the love of Orpheus for his dead wife is something that you don't need, that reaches across the generations, right?
Right.
Like, you can completely imagine somebody today, somebody in ancient Greek times, somebody in any era of history saying, I would go even to the underworld, to save you, right? Robert E. Howard has a brilliant inversion of this in his best Conan story, and one of my favorite short stories ever, Queen of the Black Coast. Where Conan's beloved Believe, and by the way, the reason it is his best Conan story is because, unlike most Conan stories, which are only fun, Queen of the Black Coast actually has something profound to say. So that, I think, puts it, it's not just entertaining, there's a cut above. It is actually critical of Conan's philosophy, and the philosophy of Belief, and, the general worldview of Robert E. Howard, which really makes it a cut above. So, in Queen of the Black Coast, Conan's beloved, who has just been killed by monstrous, demon things, Belief appears from the underworld to protect Conan from a sword striker and, a claw striker, whatever it was, allowing Conan to turn the tide of the battle and survive, fulfilling a boast that Belief had promised Conan earlier. That they ask Conan, what do you think is going to happen in the afterlife? And Conan says that he believes, following the general beliefs of his people, that those who die wander the underworld as shades for eternity. Something like the asphodel fields in Greek myth. And disagrees with him and says that she knows that there is a beyond death, that she's seen it herself, and that she would prove it to Conan if she died first, because not even the underworld would be able to hold back her love, that she would come back from the very depths of hell to save Conan in hour of need. And that is exactly what she does. And Conan, who previously had stated that nothing mattered but fighting, drinking, living a full and virile life, decide at the end of the story walks away from an empty island of treasures, and leaves the sea forever, and gives his beloved Beli a Viking funeral, knowing that. So he has recognized that there is something that is even more valuable than the life that he had valued so much. It's a wonderful story, and I think in some ways kind of almost a reverse look at the Orpheus myth. Right? It's
right.
Has a lot of the same. So Orpheus and Eurydice always fascinated me. The original version of the story that I came up with years and years and years ago, probably over a decade ago. So, very young version of Anthony. I came up with this idea of doing a modernization of Orpheus and Eurydice. I ended up falling away from that idea because I frankly cannot write music. Ben mocks my microphone. I know.
mock your internet
this is yeah, this is the same microphone I record Pinkerton's Ghosts on. It's true. I'm using the good microphone. You're trapped.
So
sorry.
well.
This is your hell now. This is your hell now.
It is my hell.
So, that was the original version of Orpheus and Eurydice I came up with. Then, as I got older, I read more C.S. Lewis, read more Christian literature and things. I started to think of what it would look like if there was a Christianization of the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. Now, Christianizations of Greek myths had happened before. I could think of two examples off the top of my head. One of them is very explicit. It is C.S. Lewis's Till We Have Faces, a Christianization of the only Greek myth with a happy ending. I'm probably exaggerating, but not by a lot. The myth of Cupid and Psyche.
There's this one story about this kid who gets eaten by the gods by accident, and Zeus kills his dad and gives the kid who got partially eaten by Demeter because she's sad about Persephone the kingdom.
That's kind of badass. I've never heard that story. But
it's
yeah,
Ovid,
the myth of Cupid and Psyche is one of the only Greek myths. One of the only Greek myths with a happy ending. And only after much, much hardship. This, by the way, includes the Perseus story. Perseus is considered to be one of the Greek heroes with the most successful lives, and that is true. But even he eventually dies of murder. So, anyway, going back to C.S. Lewis Christianizes the Cupid and Psyche myth brilliantly. Lewis, like me in some ways, although he chewed on his story for much, much longer than I did, because he wrote it near the end of his life, and he came up with it when he was in college. So, in Lewis's Till We Have Faces, he tells the story of Cupid and Psyche from the point of view of one of Psyche's sisters, who doubts Psyche's claims to be living with the god Cupid, and she sets it in like pre-Greek pagan lands almost. Like it's kind of unclear. I think that actually Aphrodite is mentioned, so I guess you would say in the time of Greece, but not in Greece, in a fictional kingdom. But it is explicitly the Cupid and Psyche story. So he tells this story and he Christianizes it by telling it from that character's perspective, and then adding an epilogue that kind of recontextualizes everything and explains everything that happens in the context of a Christian cosmology. So Cupid and Psyche happens, it's real, but Now, from what would it be like if it happened in a Christian world? I guess is how I would say it. And the other Christianization of a Greek myth is one that John C. Wright wrote, and it is called "The Cry of the Nighthound." And this isn't a myth per se, because it's actually an adaptation of a play, but it's a play with connections to Greek culture. The story of Antigone. And Antigone is a pagan play with a tragic ending. And John C. Wright, in The Cry of the Nighthound, in my opinion, he sets it in the Nightlands universe of William Hope Hodgson. John C. Wright would deny that the story was meant to be a Christianization because he was not a Christian at the time that he wrote it, which is quite true. He was not. However, I would argue that his rewrite of the Antigone story in the Nightlands, he rewrites it from a fundamentally Christian philosophy, and he adds, again, much like Lewis does, an epilogue that recontextualizes it in a world with that Christian philosophy, what it would look like. In this case, the love of Antigone does not go to waste. It is rewarded, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Her though she is heavily flawed, though she's a sinful person, though she is a person who put the whole last redoubt at rest, nevertheless, that love is strong and pure and true, and that love ultimately is enough to save herself and everyone else, right?
Yep.
So that was his way of Christian, and it's a wonderful, absolutely wonderful story. Carl Philip Gaylor says, "Right, Christianized it by accident." Nice. I wouldn't say by accident. I don't think that's exactly right. He was writing it from what he thought, from the philosophy of William Hope Hodgson, and William Hope Hodgson was a Christian.
Yep.
So
I
he
would
was
say.
being, as Wright would say.
I would
Go
also
ahead.
say that most of the best stories have the deep Christian soul at its core.
Well, since Christianity represents the highest truth, yes.
Yes.
I think so in Wright's case. Yeah, I'm trying to think of how to put it. So, in Wright's case, he was trying to write the Nightland series, in the style and spirit of William Hope Hodgson. William Hope Hodgson was explicitly a Christian.
Yes.
Right, so
Mm-hmm.
even though I don't think that Wright even knew that at the time, well, he might have, I don't know. I'm just speculating, but he certainly was not intending to write a Christian story. He was intending to write a Nightland story with the themes and the style of William Hope Hodgson would want him to write. It was his universe. William Hope Hodgson, being a Christian, if he was going to adapt the Antigone story, had to be with the underlying philosophy of the Nightlands, and the Nightlands' underlying philosophy is very much Christian.
Yes.
At its core, at its heart, right? Not explicitly, but at its heart. Much like Lord of the Rings is not explicitly Christian, but its heart is Christian.
Yes.
So, you have these Christianizations of the Greek myths, and it's a genre that I think has a lot of fertile ground. So, I was trying to think of how I could Christianize the Orpheus and Eurydice myth. And maybe there's a way to do that. And one day, John C. Wright wrote an article on Till We Have Faces, and why he did not like the book. Now, he says, and correctly, that, don't get me wrong, I agree that it's a brilliant book, it's just not my taste and not my style, because it's the most modern of Lewis's books. It's very psychological. And, that's not really how, the ancient epics would have been written, in that type of tone or style. And he also mentions in it that he doesn't get across the flavor of the ancient world very well. He doesn't talk. It has very few characters in it. There's the lead. He goes, and I could not empathize with the lead character. I don't suffer from her particular sin, so I wasn't able to empathize with her. And so that's all fair enough. That's an opinion thing. It's a taste thing. Tastes differ, right?
Yeah.
But it got me into thinking of how I would, since I was trying to do something like that, how I would do it. And I was obsessing in my head a little bit because I really wanted to do this adaptation of Orpheus and Eurydice, but how do you Christianize it? What can you do? So we actually invited John a couple of years ago now, I think. Uh,
Almost a year.
time, wow. COVID messes with time, man. We invited John onto the show to discuss the Christianization of Greek myths, and specifically Orpheus and Eurydice. And we discussed it, and we discussed his Cry of the Nighthound and a few different things. And we didn't really come to a conclusion. We speculated that it might have something to do with, like, Jesus Christ saving Eurydice or something like that. We also speculated Orpheus and Eurydice. The myth is actually mentioned in passing in Wright's The Last of All Sons. And the way that Wright tells the story, it was a trick by the gods of the underworld to release the creatures of the Nightland. Which I think is an interesting idea as well, and I do think that there is some merit to it.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Nightland, of course, it works perfectly, and it's a brilliant idea. So I'm not saying that, like, oh, that's not something I'm going to do, but I'm like, no, because I wanted there to be something like what Wright kind of recognized in his Antigone adaptation, and what Lewis recognized in his Till We Have Faces adaptation, that despite the deep flaws of these people, that love also counts for something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Orpheus, like, being, he might have been doing something sinful and trying to revive the dead and go into the underworld and defying the gods. Surely that love counts for something, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I was thinking it over, and I came up with an idea. Now, I'm not going to go through what I came up with, because this is the ending to my story, but I can tell you all this. This is a novel idea. This is not a short story idea. I am doing a version of the Orpheus and Eurydice myth right now. I'm doing it, in fact, as part of El-Jaji Lamplighter's novel writing class. So it's getting excellent, expert, tender, loving care.
I'm glad you're starting to adopt my speech mannerisms.
Yeah, that was intentional. From El-Jaji Lamplighter and the various authors who are in the novel writing class and who are working on it. So, I am also working with a poet. I'm not going to say who, even though I am 99.9% sure he will not care and might even appreciate it, but I didn't ask him. So I won't say who yet. But I am working with a poet to write Orpheus' songs, since I am not a poet. And he is quite good, and I'm excited about the work that he has given me so far. So, in the Orpheus and Eurydice story, what's really interesting about it to me is figuring out, how do you square this pagan world with the Christian reality at the core of it? Because the pagan myths point to the larger Christian reality. This is something that Lewis and Tolkien and that era of Christians really recognized. Not that they created the idea, they didn't, but they were fascinated by it. That the pagan world points to Christ, even if indirectly, even if unintentionally. It stumbles towards it. You see glimpses of the light flickering, as it were, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, the Orpheus and Eurydice story, I think, is an example of this. People can recognize that there is a certain beauty in the idea of a love so strong you can overcome, the stone heart of the god of the dead, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's something that is really beautiful in the center of that idea. But where is Christ in the story?
Right.
So I was wrestling with this. So I'm going to tell you all a little bit about what I'm doing with the Orpheus myth. So in my story, and this comes from partially a reaction to John C. Wright saying he wanted to see more of the Greek influence in Lewis's Till We Have Faces. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend changing Till We Have Faces, because I adore the book, as is, but I understood the criticism. So, my version of Orpheus is a slave in the house of Theseus, and this is the Theseus of myth, and it is the age of heroes. Heracles is around, Theseus is around, he is known, and when Orpheus is born, when he is a child, he lives in the slums of Athens and sings for coins. And then one day, when Theseus returns from a war in the far-off city of Corinth, which isn't actually that far. But when Theseus returns from war in Corinth, Orpheus sees a vision of the god Apollo asking him to sing to prepare himself to sing for Theseus. Orpheus sings his song, and in a flash of divine inspiration, after seeing a vision of Aphrodite, he tells the story of Theseus and Ariadne. And this moves the heart of Theseus so much that he brings Theseus to his palace in Athens and makes him the court singer. So, in my version of the story, Orpheus is telling his story after the fact to explain how the gods have used him cruelly.
Mm-hmm.
He is writing down his story to say, I thought I was chosen by the gods. I saw visions of the gods. People were saying maybe I was even descended from one of the muses or from Apollo. And the gods were mocking me. And I need everybody to know that the gods are cruel, and I am going to tell my story. So, my version of Orpheus is somebody who doesn't have much of a will of his own. He is somebody who is always being driven along by the gods and trying, and because he sees himself as somebody who he can sing. That is the one thing he could do, but he manages to live a good life because he follows what he believes the visions of the gods are telling him. The one choice that Orpheus only makes until Eurydice's death, one true choice on his own, and that is the choice to marry Eurydice, who is also a slave in the house of the Queen of Cardia, who Theseus has decided to marry later in his middle age, settling down in his life a little bit. Now, of course, the story goes as expected at that point. Eurydice dies in an accident, traditionally in a snake bite, I believe.
Yep.
And I'm probably going to use that. You were going to say something?
Yeah, no, it was snake bite.
What was that?
It was a snake bite.
Yep. Yeah, so Eurydice, in my version of the story, is of course going to die. I am not going to be subverting it in that manner. And Orpheus is going to make the decision, after talking with Theseus and learning that Theseus made a trip to the underworld himself, that he is going to write a song so beautiful it can move the cold heart of the king of the dead, or even if not him, perhaps his wife Persephone, and he will go down to the underworld and he will bring Eurydice back. So, this is my setup to the story. My setup to the story is that Theseus is a slave in the house of, that Orpheus, is a slave in the palace of Theseus, and he sees himself as somebody who is a kind of a vessel in the hands of the gods. He was given his voice as a gift to the gods, and that voice is why he's able to do anything, and the gods have appeared to him in certain key moments of his life to sort of direct him towards, what he thinks his purpose should be. So, him defying the gods for Eurydice is a very big step in that sense. The gods gave him Eurydice, the gods took Eurydice away. From Orpheus' perspective, what this means is that the gods were mocking him. They were cruel, it was amusing to them. And if he were talking about only the Greek gods and not the Christian cosmology, he might in fact be right. It seems like something the gods might do, just to be entertained. Certainly they can be capricious. Sometimes they are nice and sympathetic, and sometimes they just decide that they don't really want to deal with mortals today, so they're going to turn you into a jackalope. And if it seems unfair, well, you shouldn't have looked at Artemis bathing, should you?
Right.
I mean, sure, you stumbled on her in the forest, and you weren't actually looking for her, and also she was literally a goddess, and there was probably some sort of divine power at work that didn't allow you to look away. Tough luck. So, where I go after this point, I'm going to try and be more broad and general in terms of how I decided in my philosophy where to go with the story. The way that I saw it, there needed to be something that was lacking in Orpheus' love that made it so that he could not bring Eurydice back properly. Because the test of what to do, like why give him the test not to look back, what does that mean, and what was the key to Orpheus' power and Orpheus' song? So I characterize Orpheus' song as the ability to sing the truth. That when he sang something, and, especially when it was something that was, gifted to him by the gods, his voice was so pure and so beautiful that people could recognize the truth in it, and they knew that it was true. So, when he sings a song of love for Eurydice, there's something very pure and true and beautiful in it. But the way that I see it, human love is ultimately not enough. Right?
Right.
Can't save people because of human love. Human
Mm-hmm.
love isn't enough to create society. Human love is not enough to save us or save ourselves. And it's kind of a flaw in the modern world that people, see, love is all you need, right? Beatles song, right?
Right.
And all that is true in a sense. It's not the love that they're talking about.
Right.
There's the Greek perspective of the four loves of agape, philia. I keep forgetting the name of it, but I know that it's family love. And Eros, right?
Yes.
What Orpheus has for Eurydice is Eros. And Eros is good. It is a good thing in and of itself. Right?
Right.
Like all types of love, even agape, it can be distorted. But taken on its own, there is nothing wrong with Eros. That is the romantic love between a man and a woman. And that is what Orpheus has for Eurydice. But Eros is not agape. It is not enough.
Mm-hmm.
So, Orpheus singing his song to Eurydice, I think that what I need to express in this song is that the song itself, Orpheus's love, although it is true and he is missing something significant to the puzzle. As a human being, he can't really love Eurydice as fully as it is possible to love someone. None of us can. Nobody fully loves anybody else in the same way that God does. Not your
Right.
not a mother or their child, not anybody, right?
Right.
It's God who loves fully. So Orpheus thinks that he could bring somebody out of the underworld with his love, but this is, in a sense, a type of hubris, because he's saying that his love is stronger than the love of the gods. But there are things about Eurydice that he simply cannot understand, and that in story he doesn't understand. Eurydice completes him, and that's how he relates to her. And he does truly love her, and he does truly care about her. But ultimately, the fact that he is limited by his human understanding of things means that he doesn't fully understand her, not in the way that God does.
Yep.
So that's my hint of where I'm planning on going with the story. And in the tradition of both John C. Wright and C.S. Lewis, I am changing the ending. But not perhaps in the way that you think. So, after Orpheus makes it back to the land of the living, he is not going to get killed by the Menaiads or the Dryads. He is going to make another decision. He is going to decide that enough is enough, and he is going to confront the gods. So, this is something that Lewis also includes in the brilliant trial scene at the end of Till We Have Faces, where the main character finally gets to make her complaint to the gods, and she stands in front of them with her book. But instead of reading from her book, she speaks what is truly on her heart, and it is sick and it is disturbing. So, I'm not saying that that's what I'm going to do. In fact, I can tell you explicitly that that is not what I am going to do. But like the main character of Lewis' Till We Have Faces, my Orpheus has his grievances against the god, and he wants to see what the god, Hades would not help him. But Hades is not the king of the gods. Maybe the king of the gods will help him. So that's the idea that I had in mind. Where it will go from there, I will not say, but I have a plan. And it's interesting. I'm trying to explore different ideas of love in the story. Orpheus is a slum dweller, but he forms a relationship with two people in the story, Phoebe and Kyros. And the old man Kyros and the teenaged prostitute in the story who becomes a slave in the house of Theseus herself. They end up becoming sort of parent figures to Orpheus. And throughout the story, they help him before their own death. And Orpheus is going to meet them in the underworld, and this is going to make him see the different types of love and how that affects, how that affects things, right? Like, he's going to Eurydice, but did he not also love Eros and Phoebe? What sort of person is he that he would leave them behind? But he's going to have to leave them behind. He can't take everybody with him, and certainly the god dead is really God. And perhaps he can convince him about Eurydice, but 3 different people, not a chance. So there's also this idea of the way that they die in this new world is kind of cruel and capricious, or at least it can be. Kyros lives to an old age, and he ends up living what I would describe in my story as a fairly good life, but Phoebe does not. Phoebe dies young, and Phoebe lived a difficult life, which only had some temporary cessation of hardship relatively near the end of it, within the last few years of it. And then she just dies. So this is unfair. It's unfair for Eurydice, but Kyros manages to live to an old age, but what did his life even mean? She dies without family. He dies without heirs. He dies without, any of that, and Orpheus is it. Orpheus goes to the underworld, but he doesn't go for them. So how does this affect the way that we think about love? I guess what I'm trying to get at, and what I think is at the heart of my version of the story, is the difference between the love of God and the love of man. How the love of man is ultimately never going to be enough, and will be inferior, but the love of God will always be enough. There is enough. There is a way, and that way is God. And God loves us more than all of us. Mary, Merg, Maggle, Maxis comments, Mary is a virgin. We have moved on, my friend. Merg, Maggle, Maxis also says, I hear Robo voice. I know.
Yep.
Ben only hears.
It's been Robo voice.
No.
I've told him about it. It's an internet problem for him. It'll clear
Ben
up
only
once
hears pain.
Yeah, I hear a lot of pain. Ken also hears pain, but it's okay. It's alright. My love is enough. It's sufficient.
Yeah, your love.
It's sufficient. What, you're making fun of love? You're making fun of love, Anthony? My goodness, this guy.
After my whole little speech, your love's not enough. You need the love of God.
Yeah. You're right.
Anyway. Yeah, so that's the way that I'm trying to go. That's the direction I'm trying to go in my story. It's something that is very dear to my heart, in that I've been working on a long time. Now, the funny thing is that I am writing a romance. And it is a romance. Orpheus and Eurydice is always a romance. It has to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I have no experience myself with romantic relationships. So, that's going to be fun.
They're going to be able to smell it on you.
Reminds me of something Ben Kingsley once said, where he was working with the actor. He was working with somebody who was telling him that he was involved in method acting. He goes, yeah, I live like my character. I do all of this like my character. And Ben Kingsley responds, why don't you try acting, my dear boy? That's probably would be easier. So that is the way that I see it. Like, do you have experience with romantic relationships? No, but I'm a writer. I make stuff up. So, it's true, though. Yeah, there is that worry in the back of your mind that someone's going to smell on you. You don't really understand what it's like, right?
Right.
And yet, I feel like in the world that we currently live in, it should be enough.
It is.
So, like,
I mean,
in the
Stephen
world that
King
we live
tries
in,
to write Small Town America.
What was that?
I mean, Stephen King tries to write Small Town America.
And he's somewhat successful sometimes. So, yeah, what I was gonna say though, like in terms of writing a romantic relationship, I think in the modern world and with the examples of writing that we have, and the examples of real life around me and the references I could draw on, I should be able to do it. It should be enough that I can draw on, the experiences of others and people around me. Yeah, that's the goal anyway. Alternatively, I could fall in love and get married before I finish the book, and then if that happens, I will have firsthand experience. So, that is a great proposal idea. Go up to someone and go, "Excuse me, I'm writing a book. Will you marry me?" Uh,
They might
and
say
then
yes.
not even explain. Yeah, not even explain why and go, "What's it for?" It's like, it's the experience. I need to know what it's like to be married.
I write true crime, baby.
And then, and then 1 year later, I just walk out and go, "All right, thanks. That was helpful." Go,
All I
where are you
needed.
going? Yeah, exactly. Go, I wrote it all in my notebook. I won't forget it. I'll make sure to mention you in the afterward.
No, I'm not giving you
Great
a cut
job.
of the profits, though. No profits.
No, you didn't write anything.
Exactly. Who does this person think she is? How dare she think she's entitled to it?
I'm now imagining this going down, just like 1 year after marrying someone, walking out and going, "All right, thanks, I got the experience." Going, "Wait, what?" And go, "Yeah, need to know what it would be like to be married, and that was great. Good job, excellent work."
Enjoyed every second.
Uh, yeah, tell the kids I love them. We now have, because we had triplets, obviously. Uh, yeah. So Orpheus' story is interesting. The Greek myths, I've discussed too of possibly doing this in a series, like series of Christianized Greek myths, but I'm not so sure about that. I'm actually already kind of worried about this being too similar to C.S. Lewis's Till We Have Faces.
Don't worry about it. Never worry about something being too similar to something else. Never.
It's more I'm worried about it because he uses a very similar framing device, but I would argue that, I was actually like trying to come up with one, but this framing device just works very naturally. You know, Orpheus compiling complaint against the gods just kind of makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
But that is like explicitly what Lewis is doing until we have faces.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, I don't really see a better option. Like, it does make sense.
Mm-hmm.
The thing too is that it's something. I think you mentioned this to me once. Like something that is so universal in like the way that humanity looks at religion. Yeah. Uh, it is the norm to think that the gods are unfair.
Yes.
Right? It's the exception not to blame the gods.
Mm-hmm.
And it is in fact C.S. Lewis himself said that when he first came up with the idea for Till We Have Faces, the gods were the bad guys in the story. It was only after he became a Christian that this idea changed. Because Christianity is the only religion that has figured out the problem of evil.
Yeah.
So I think that there is something to this idea that, like, in other religions, they don't really have. I mean, I guess in a sense, they do have an answer to the problem of evil. Their answer to the problem of evil is to deny one of the premises. God's not good. Yeah.
Yep.
Right? Like, the gods are not good. And that's just kind of commonly understood. Now, it's interesting too, because when we think of like the Greek religion, I think even thinking of it as a religion is a little bit off. Like, they didn't have holy books. Yeah. Like, it was more just the Greek way things were done.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes any sense. So
Right.
I think Lewis portrays this. He portrays this very well in Till We Have Faces, where like one of the priests of Aphrodite, or his version of Aphrodite, is a major part of the plot, and there is a naturalist who becomes her tutor, the fox, and he believes that the priest is a liar, and that he's just making everything up. But the main character immediately realizes when the king threatens to kill him, and he does not flinch. Tells him take back what you said, or I'm going to kill you, and he doesn't flinch. She realizes immediately that the fox is completely wrong, that this man entirely believes everything that he's saying, and that the fox is wrong because, in fact, what he's saying is real. Like, there is truth in the pagan myths. Just because he's pagan doesn't mean he's not communicating with the gods in any way. That God isn't speaking to him at all in any sense of the word. Even if the God he's speaking to is a demon, he's still communicating with the supernatural. And to completely deny that, because, you question the, trying to think of the way to put it. Because you question the foundations of the religion, you deny that there is any sense of God that's happening in these priests, I defy. And this is something, too, that you get in, Christian apologetics, where you go, well, do you think that miracles happen in other religions? And my answer to that is, yeah, I'm sure they do. Though I do think it's notable that you don't see it as, there isn't as much of a history of it as in Christianity. Christianity has this rigorous, record of, recorded miracles and things like that throughout the centuries.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't in other religions, but you do see it occasionally. But I believe it. I don't think that there is no, connection with God in other religions. I think it's stilted and lesser. But I think it exists.
Yep.
Anyway, go ahead.
How do I want to put it? Like, when it comes to these Greek myths, like, the gods are not amoral jerks, even then. They still have codes of honor they follow, except they're permissible from our perspective. So, and Greeks would, as we've said in other broadcasts, say, well, my pastor was talking about, some people try some crazy stuff to get noticed by God and stuff like that. And, and mentally, I didn't say anything, but mentally I went, you don't want to get noticed by Zeus, because then he'll notice your wife. And then it's like, well, guess I'm, gonna father a hero, adoptively father a hero, among other things. There's so much to it, but the idea of something being morally evil to them for some of this stuff, like the story I mentioned about the kid who got partially eaten by Demeter, he was entirely, how do I want to put it? There was a morality there. The guy killed and served up his son as a feast to the gods, and that was unacceptable. That was very unacceptable. And it's, how do I want to put it? It's important to not forget that the gods, being representations of men as gods, men and women as gods, have the flaws of men and women the size of gods as well, unlike our own perfect God. So there's things that the pagans cannot comprehend, like perfection, that sort of fall away. It's a contrast to my story, where these people understand that they're sinful and they cannot achieve perfection, but they are trying to achieve perfection.
Yeah, we've mentioned this before too. Like, it's important to remember that what we think of the Greek gods and the Greek myths are not necessarily what the Greeks would have thought. Like the idea of if Zeus did anything wrong, from our perspective at fathering children with mortals? Well,
Mm-hmm.
they did have a recognition that what he did was wrong, right? Because Hera objected to it.
Right.
Yeah,
But it
so
was more about
they
her
wanted
being
to fire
cuckolded than any particular moral judgment. She does not call Zeus evil. She says, "You jerk. I'm going to make that kid's life miserable." And then Zeus doesn't do
exactly.
anything about it.
I think if you ask the people about, like, if Zeus were to do anything wrong, they would almost be confused by the question. It's like, Zeus raped a woman, and they would be like, what do you mean rape? It's Zeus.
Mm-hmm.
Like, rape doesn't even make sense in the context of talking about Zeus, because you're going to listen to what he says. And if you're not, you've disobeyed the gods, and you're the one at fault.
Mm.
So it's not really a matter of rape when it comes to Zeus. That concept doesn't really work in the Greek world. Not in that, in the circumstance of, like, the gods raping mortals, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They just wouldn't think of it that way. They would think that if Zeus wants to have a child with a mortal woman, now this might be unfortunate for Hera, but the mortal woman is not being raped by Zeus. Zeus is taking what is rightfully his by divine fiat anyway. And the woman would either accept it, in which case it would not be rape, or she should accept it because it's the god who is making the order, in which case, she would be the one at fault for trying to refuse.
Mm-hmm.
So, the whole idea of, Zeus as a rapist is a later invention. Even the idea of, like, Hades captured the rape of Persephone, which it really means, like, the kidnapping of Persephone.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird. It's honestly a hard story, I think, for moderns to understand, because Hades was considered, by and large, to be the best husband of the gods, right? He was faithful. Unlike the other gods, he treated
Mm-hmm.
Persephone well. He allowed her to return to the surface, though she did kind of trick him into it. But even so, he doesn't take his anger out on Persephone, which is itself notable, and
Mm-hmm.
yet he kidnaps her. So it's kind of a weird dichotomy. Like, how do you square this, right?
Right.
What sort of person is Hades supposed to be? And the answer is, Hades was a god. And Persephone was a god too, but she wasn't one of the Olympians. She was a lower god, right? So
Yeah.
Hades wanted her. The only real sin was committed against Demeter, and that was decided upon. When Zeus deliberates about the marriage of Hades and Persephone, he's really deliberating on Demeter's behalf, because Demeter was of the same rank or near the same rank as Hades. So
Yep.
the insult was her. The kidnapping of Persephone was not even really the point. Like, what Persephone thought about the matter, well, Persephone's going to accept it, because she is below Hades in rank.
Yeah.
That's just the way it works. It's the same sort of attitude of Zeus fathering children with mortals. There might be a sin committed, but the sin would be against another god. The sin might be against Hera, because he promised to be faithful to Hera. And even then, in the Iliad, Zeus has an amazing speech where they're like where Hera basically tells Zeus, so you owe me one for doing this. And then Zeus kind of shuts her up and goes, hold on a second. I owe you? Don't forget who you're talking to. Like, I am Zeus. I do what I want.
Mm.
So, like, yeah, he does need to keep it sometimes. And he will, negotiate, and he will, like, try and make deals and whatever. But in the end, he is Zeus. His word goes.
Mm-hmm.
So, in terms of, like, how Orpheus views the gods, moving the heart of the god of the dead is something that, he's counting on the humanity of the gods, and that's doomed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet, it's not doomed. It works to an extent, only Orpheus adds that impossible condition. You know,
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons, too, that the story of Orpheus and Eurydice works is that, in a sense, don't we all know that Orpheus couldn't succeed? Right? Like, just intuitively. He couldn't get, you know, he
Yes.
can't succeed.
Right.
That even though Orpheus looks back and you wonder to yourself, why did he look back? What caused her to look back? What did it? There's also a certain sense of inevitability where you're like, of course he looked back. Because people don't come back from the dead. Yeah.
Yep.
Like, we know that's how it works. The God of the dead does not allow that. Now, of course, in the Christian cosmology, we have a God that does bring people back from the dead if he so chooses. And one day will bring us all back from the death no longer has power over us. But in the world of the Greeks, that wasn't the case. In the world of the Greeks, those who died were dead. And it's Achilles who says, when Odysseus meets him in the underworld, that even though he lives in the Elysian fields, I think, he would trade all of his time there for like one more second alive. So that's part of the power of the story and something that I really wanted to explore. That, like, you know, it's a doomed world, but also, you know, the world of the pagans, well, they thought it was a doomed world. It was the world of Christ. It was the same world. They just didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I will stop for now. Unfortunately, I don't think that Ben has as much to contribute about Greek mythology as I sometimes do about the Arthurian myths. Plus, we've talked about it before.
Yeah, and
What was
also
that?
I'm very tired. You know, I do a couple jobs past midnight on Friday and Saturday, so sometimes I just lose steam.
Sad.
Ah, well, need the money.
Yeah. I'm really looking forward, though. The Orpheus story is something that I'm excited about. I'm excited about the solution I came up with. I think it does justice to Christian mythology, using mythology in the technical sense of, you know, stories about religion, right?
Yeah.
And to the pagan mythologies. I think it does justice to everything, and I think that I've kind of managed to square the circle and to say something real. Following in the footsteps of my mentor and idol, C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
I would hope that's the goal.
I get you.
Anything you want to add before we go, Ben?
Nope. We'll figure out something for next week, and then the week after that, we will have Anthony will be hosting the show on the May 8th, and then May 15th we will have Protestants versus Catholics, the Protestant Reformation. So look forward to that. It's going to be pretty good. I've got some education.
Same
on
structure as last show.
Yep.
Yeah, so
though this time
quick thing,
Anthony will be beginning.
Yes, it is not a debate as we've discussed before. For a variety of reasons, neither of us want to do a debate. It will instead be what I would call something like a dual discussion, where I would speak, Ben would speak, and then we would take questions.
The problem is that, like, when it comes to debates, all Anthony has to say, it is ex cathedra dogma, and I have to say it is not based on biblical explanations, and then we're stuck because neither will give an inch.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that.
Like, I'm not going to move.
I would somewhat.
Yeah.
You would need to go, like, it would need to dig down so far that, like, if we're debating any one topic, eventually you're going to dig down to the sources of authority, which I'm sure we'll eventually do one day as well, but
yeah,
even then it would be, I don't know, for a variety of reasons, I don't think a debate would be a good idea
yep,
in and of itself. I think it's and also giving people the alternate perspectives and seeing both of us,
mm-hmm.
you know, hearing us talk about it would perhaps help people. I know that people have said that they enjoyed those discussions, and I'm glad about that.
Yeah. All right, I'll let you guys go. Have a good one.